The man stood in the pouring rain outside the mansion gates for nearly 2 hours. Years earlier, he had sacrificed his career, his reputation, and even his personal fortune to help the man who lived inside that grand estate. He had defended him when nobody else would. He had worked through sleepless nights to ensure his success. He had treated the man's victories as if they were his own. Now, after traveling hundreds of miles to ask for help during the darkest moment of his life, he received a simple message from a servant. "Mr. Carnegie is unavailable." The servant closed the gate. The man remained standing silently in the rain. What he didn't know was that this painful rejection would eventually lead him toward a completely different path, one that history would remember long after both men were gone. His name was Henry Clay Frick, and his story would become one of the most fascinating examples of how the people we value most can sometimes become the ones who hurt us the deepest. In the late 1800s, America was transforming faster than any nation on Earth. Railroads stretched across the continent. Factories rose above growing cities. Steel became the foundation of modern civilization. At the center of this industrial revolution stood a young Scottish immigrant named Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie arrived in America as a poor boy. Through intelligence, relentless work, and extraordinary ambition, he built what would become one of the largest steel empires in history. But no empire is built alone. As Carnegie's business expanded, he needed talented people he could trust. That is when Henry Clay Frick entered the picture. Frick was every bit as ambitious as Carnegie. Born in Pennsylvania, he built a successful coke production business that supplied fuel essential for steel manufacturing. He was disciplined, ruthless when necessary, and exceptionally skilled at managing complex operations. Carnegie quickly recognized his value. The two men formed a partnership that would reshape American industry. At first, their relationship seemed unbreakable. Carnegie admired Frick's business abilities. Frick respected Carnegie's vision. Together, they helped create one of the most powerful industrial organizations in the world. They spent years building wealth, expanding factories, and defeating competitors. Many people describe them as the perfect team. But history has a way of revealing cracks that success often hides. As Carnegie's empire grew, tensions slowly emerged beneath the surface. The two men shared ambition, but they did not share the same personality. Carnegie loved public praise. He carefully cultivated an image as a generous businessman who cared about workers and society. Frick cared little about public approval. He focused almost entirely on efficiency, profits, and results. The differences became impossible to ignore during one of the most controversial labor conflicts in American history. In 1892, workers at the Homestead Steel Works demanded better wages and working conditions. Negotiations collapsed. What followed became known as the Homestead Strike. Frick took charge of handling the crisis. Determined to break the strike, he hired hundreds of armed guards from the Pinkerton Detective Agency to secure the factory. The situation exploded into violence. Gunfire erupted. Several people died. The entire nation watched in shock. Newspapers published dramatic headlines daily. Public anger intensified. And although Carnegie was traveling in Scotland during much of the conflict, many critics believed he quietly supported Frick's actions while avoiding direct responsibility. The strike became one of the darkest chapters in American labor history. More importantly, it permanently damaged the relationship between the two partners. Privately, Carnegie began distancing himself from Frick. Publicly, he increasingly portrayed himself as separate from decisions that had once been made together. Frick felt betrayed. For years, he had protected Carnegie's business interests. For years, he had made difficult decisions that helped the company succeed. Now, when criticism arrived, Carnegie seemed willing to let Frick carry much of the blame alone. The resentment grew. Letters between the two men became colder. Meetings became tense. Trust slowly disappeared. Eventually, the conflict reached a breaking point. Carnegie secretly supported efforts to remove Frick from leadership within the company. When Frick discovered what was happening, he was furious. The man he had helped build into one of the richest individuals in the world was now working against him behind closed doors. Their friendship collapsed completely. What followed was a bitter legal and financial battle between former allies. Newspapers across America covered the dispute extensively. The public was fascinated. How could two men who had achieved so much together become such bitter enemies? The answer was surprisingly human. Sometimes expectations create deeper wounds than actions themselves. Frick had not expected betrayal from competitors. He had expected loyalty from Carnegie, and that expectation made the disappointment far more painful. Eventually, Frick left Carnegie's organization entirely. At the time, many people assumed his influence would fade. After all, he was leaving the company that had made him famous. But history had other plans. Instead of disappearing, Frick built an extraordinary legacy of his own. He expanded his investments. He accumulated one of the world's greatest private art collections. He became one of America's most influential industrialists in his own right. His New York mansion eventually became the famous Frick Collection, one of the most respected art museums in the United States.
Ironically, the separation that once seemed devastating became the turning point that allowed him to create an independent legacy. Meanwhile, Carnegie also continued achieving enormous success, yet despite their accomplishments, the relationship between the two men never truly recovered. The friendship that had once helped build an empire remained broken. Historians still debate who was more responsible for the conflict. Some blame Carnegie, others blame Frick. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But perhaps the most enduring lesson comes from the emotional side of the story rather than the business side. The deepest disappointments in life rarely come from strangers. A stranger cannot betray expectations they never created. The people who affect us most are often the people we trust most, the people we support most, the people whose success we celebrate as if it were our own. That does not mean we should stop valuing others. It simply means we should never build our entire identity around another person's loyalty. Because human beings are imperfect, friendships change, partnerships end, priorities shift, and sometimes the person you once considered indispensable chooses a different path. Henry Clay Frick learned that lesson in one of the most public ways imaginable. The man he had helped elevate to greatness eventually became the source of one of his greatest disappointments. Yet that disappointment did not destroy him. It redirected him. And in the end, the chapter that began with betrayal became the chapter that revealed who he truly was without anyone else's shadow standing over him. History reminds us again and again, the people you value most may not always stay, but your future should never depend entirely on whether they do.